Well, welcome to Focus Today. Today is a very special day in America. As at our nation's capital, at the National Cathedral, there is a public memorial service for the late Chuck Colson. And of course, you've heard Chuck here for years on Breakpoint on the Dove. And he certainly was a man of incredible influence on the culture. Well, Dr. Timothy George, he's the founding dean of Beeson Divinity School and also chairman of the board of the Colson Center of Christian Worldview. And we spoke with him earlier because today he has the assignment of delivering the homily at that very special public memorial for Chuck Colson. Here's my conversation now with Dr. George. Well, delighted to have with us on this very special day Reverend Dr. Timothy George, who is the dean and professor with Beeson Divinity School at Samford University, and he also serves as chairman of the board of directors for the Colson Center for Christian Worldview. And he'll be giving homily at the public memorial to the late Chuck Colson coming up later today. And Dr. George, what an honor to have you with us today, sir.
Thank you so much. I'm glad to be here on this day that we celebrate the victory Chuck Colson has won in his life's work, now with the Lord.
Well, you know, we are all saddened at the same time as you look back over this rich life. What an incredible legacy this man leaves, not only for the United States, but for Christianity in the world. His work is just unbelievable in the short amount of time that he was a believer.
It's so true. You know, the bedrock of this is the fact that Chuck Colson was a truly redeemed person. We all know his story. He told it in Born Again, which was published in 1976, clawing his way up the corridors of power till he reached the very pinnacle as special counsel to the President of the United States, and then shattered completely in the Watergate crisis. But out of that, God did a remarkable work of grace in Chuck Colson's life. He sent him to prison. When he got out, he went back to prison again and again to minister in Jesus' name to inmates, not just here in America, but all around the world. That was a part of his vision. And today, Prison Fellowship is chartered in 113 countries around the world.
Well, he kept his word because he said as he was leaving, I will be back, and he did come back.
Yes.
Dr. George, it was said often that he was the Paul of our day. Do you think that was a fair assessment?
You know, he would be very unhappy with that because he never thought of himself in those grandiose terms. If you really want to know Chuck Colson, I think you have to look at the heroes in his life. And there were three primary great heroes. He quoted them, he read them, he turned to them again and again. The first was William Wilberforce, this young member of Parliament who gave his life to the ending of the slave trade in the 19th century.
Right.
The second was Abraham Kuyper. He was a Dutch theologian and actually prime minister of the Netherlands for a while. And he's the one who said that line I think Chuck quoted more than anything else. When Jesus Christ looks out in the whole arena of human existence, there's not one square inch of which he does not say, mine, that belongs to me. So the sovereignty of Christ, the lordship of Christ over every area of life. And then finally, of course, there's Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who Chuck, I think, in many ways read more closely than any 20th century figure.
Wasn't C.S. Lewis also significant in the fact that it was his books that began to turn him towards his faith?
Yeah, especially Mere Christianity. And C.S. Lewis was, of course, a great apologist for the Christian faith. And that's something else that has to be said about Chuck. He's so multidimensional. If the only thing he'd ever done was to work in the prisons and bring about reform in the justice system, that would be a remarkable story. But, of course, he understood that that work would ultimately fail unless it was undergirded by a vibrant Christian worldview. And so in the last 2 or 3 decades of his life, he gave himself more and more to teaching and training up men and women of all walks of life to think Christianly about the world, about society, about culture. He was not just into politics. He's often written off that way. It's just the old political Colson, but that's not true. He knew that culture changes from the bottom up, grassroots up, and that's what he gave himself to, training a new generation faithful disciples of Jesus Christ.
You know, it's on that point, Dr. George, I'd like to have you maybe comment a little further. Of all of the books that I read on the culture and the culture war, it seems that Chuck Colson had the greatest grasp of what was happening to the culture, the antidote to the mess that the culture has, and his ability to get it. I mean, he seemingly jumped from becoming a Christian into becoming the cultural spokesman, so to speak, for Christianity.
Yes, and of course he had a lot of encouragers and mentors in his early life as a believer, one of whom was the late Francis Schaeffer. In many ways, I think Chuck kind of picked up the mantle that Francis Schaeffer left when he moved on to be with the Lord. And another great figure that had an influence on Chuck was John Stott. But in many ways, Chuck sort of took that mantle and articulated, I agree with you, as clearly as anybody I ever heard, the situation we were in and what the remedy was for those who looked to God and to Jesus Christ.
All right, so tomorrow you've been given the high honor to give the homily. Your thoughts?
Well, and indeed, Chuck had asked me to do this several years ago, actually, and
really?
I said, of course, but never thinking the day would come, and now the day is here. I'm deeply honored, I'm humbled, and I just pray that what I say will not only honor this great servant of Jesus Christ that is known all over the world, but most of all, as he would want, to lift up his Lord, Jesus Christ the Savior.
All right, so what's going to happen with the Colson Center for Christian Worldview? What do you see the future being there?
It was Chuck's desire and intention that the Colson Center continue, that it be more and more invested in the work of formation of Christian worldview for younger leaders. That's what we're doing now with all the initiatives that are going on, particularly with the Centurions, with Breakpoint. Eric Metaxas, a name that will be known surely to some of your listeners, has stepped in to fill the voice of Chuck for a while on Breakpoint Radio. So this work will continue as God enables it and gives us strength and resources to do so.
Well, Dr. George, thank you. I know that you're busy, and to have us to get you to express your feelings today, especially on this day where Chuck will be remembered for his incredible work on the public memorial, and it'll be there at the Washington National Cathedral, which is a beautiful setting.
Yes.
And he's certainly worthy of being honored there. Thank you so much, and God bless you. And please know that all of you there at the Colson Center, that you remain in our prayers, and we are excited what God's going to do with the organization in the future.
I appreciate it so much. God bless you and your listeners.
Thank you. Certainly an honor to have Dr. Timothy George with us today, and again, the public memorial for the late Chuck Colson being held at the Washington National Cathedral this morning. All right, coming up next, John Mittendorf's in the house as we continue our discussion. What happened in the Grand Canyon, and what did Mount St. Helens prove? We'll talk about that next here on Focus Today.
Airport, the only name you need to know.
I checked prices on the web and found airport prices were even less.
I saved thousands by buying my truck at airport.
I shopped the internet, and that's how I know I got the best deal at Airport Chevrolet.
It was well worth a drive to airport.
Medford Construction, a leader in the construction industry. From concept to completion, we will deliver to you the highest quality workmanship at the lowest price possible. Our design build team will complete your project on time and on budget. Give us a call for an evaluation on making your home more user-friendly for special needs and the elderly. For great prices without sacrificing quality, give Medford Construction a call or visit us at medfordconstruction.com.
Oh, wow! Letters stand for Oregon Women of the Word. It is a biblical conference that we give once a year, and you need to bring your Bible, because you will open it.
Denominational barriers are dropped.
It's close.
I've made many friends.
It's affordable.
I enjoyed Kari a lot. I got a lot out of her teaching.
For seminar details, go to OregonWomenOfTheWord.org.
White House correspondent David Brody.
Don't worry, we've come to the rescue.
Emmy award-winning veteran news journalist.
This week we went into full stalking mode at CPAC, and it paid off.
Political analysis you can trust.
Politically, you have to wonder why the president decided to do this.
This is really a serious assault on the rights of religious freedom of every American.
You never know when we're going to show up or where.
The Brody File.
Crank it up.
7:30 Friday on the Dove TV.
I saved thousands by buying my GMC at Airport.
It was so worth the 250-mile drive, I saved thousands.
They really went out of their way to get us the deal we wanted.
My next purchase will be a car for my wife.
Airport, the only name you need to know.
Always a delight to have John Mittendorf in the studio with us, and as we continue on our discussions about, well, the whole subject of creation versus evolution and some of the science behind that. John also works with the Answers in Genesis organization, and today we're continuing our discussion. What does the Grand Canyon prove, and what does Mount St. Helen prove? And John, nice to have you back.
Well, thanks, Perry.
We had the discussion yesterday with some men who are going to be holding a global warming conference in conjunction with the NATO conference in Chicago, and more evidence now is coming out to show that the well, let's call it what it is, junk science behind global warming, when actually it's nature, if we can say that, doing its thing on a cycle, basis.
I just, right before the program started, I mentioned that, and I just heard this about, I'm going to say about 2 months ago, and I don't remember the gentleman's name, but the PhD scientist that started the global warming movement, kind of the father of global warming. Mm-hmm. And it was on the news that he has now backed away from it and said it's junk science. It doesn't work, hasn't. And of course you've heard of the global warming gate, you know, and all the files were, the documents had been modified and everything like that. So.
Well, that kind of plays into the hands of some of the things that you defend as well, evolution versus creationism, and where we are in some of this. Fascinating discussion we've had in the last couple of get-togethers on what the Grand Canyon represents and what Mount St. Helens eruption has produced.
It has produced. And, out of all the series we've done for the past, 2 or 3 or 4 years, this one has generated an immense amount of interest that we got a lot of calls. We did the program a couple of weeks ago. Right. And I knew before I started, this is not going to go 1 or 2 segments.
Yeah. And
sure enough, I got home. I got phone calls at home. Mm-hmm. Were you giving out my phone number?
Well, you want me to? No, I don't. You're John Mittendorf.
And then when I went to church, I had people come up and say, I've never heard that before. What's this deal with the continental drift theory and all the stuff that we've talked about before in the past? And to me, it's fascinating. But the one thing that constantly amazes me on this is that when I study this stuff is how all of this points towards the biblical account of creation and the global flood, and how much dancing around the mulberry bush scientists have to do to be able to justify their approach to science without recognizing the Bible or the global flood. And it's very, very difficult. And I constantly say, well, and I'm just being facetious, we say junk science and science is out to lunch. But science is very, very good. And science does a lot of good things. However, I think when science sets themselves at the top, let's say the knowledge pyramid and everything comes below that, such as the Bible, then we run into problems. And I think a classic example of this, and I brought this article in this morning, this was in the Mail Tribune last week, and it's British scientists, dinosaurs, and how dinosaurs went extinct. And of course, the scientific theory about that is dinosaurs went extinct 65 million years ago because of an asteroid that hit the Earth. That is the common prevailing theory on how that happened. But you got to stop and think about it. And one of the things that I want to do during
Where's the proof of an asteroid hitting the Earth?
Well, there are proofs of asteroids hitting the Earth, but this is what I want you to think about for a second. And as we go through this series on the Grand Canyon and Mount St. Helens, I want people that are listening and watching just to use some common sense, because I'm going to talk about some of the things that science says and then what the Bible says, and I want you to use just common sense on what seems to be more realistic and plausible. And dinosaurs is a classic example. As an example, dinosaurs supposedly died out 65 million years ago because an asteroid hit the Earth. Have you ever wondered why, when the asteroid hit the Earth and these clouds of dust and volcanic ash and all that stuff, and of course Mount St. Helens in 80, you know what volcanic ash did. I mean, it was very destructive. Why did it kill the dinosaurs but nothing else?
Well,
Is that a good question, or is
That's
that a good question?
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah. So when they say, well, an asteroid hit the Earth and killed the dinosaurs, you go, okay, well, why are we still here then? I mean, why are other animals still here?
Yeah.
Well, now we have a new study by British scientists that dinosaurs were originally plant eaters. And so this study, now I don't want you to laugh, in the Mail Tribune says the dinosaurs basically emitted methane gas because they were eating all these plants.
Yeah, they were heavy on fiber, and that
heavy on fiber, yeah.
And that created global warming.
I'm trying to stay serious.
Yeah, I know. We had the story. We were rolling on the floor with it.
But you know, it's interesting that this supposedly is science, that you have all of these dinosaurs emitting methane gas, and that's what caused global warming, and that's what killed the dinosaurs. Think about that for a second.
Well, no, wait a minute. We're all eliminating methane gas. Why are we all here?
Not that much. Well, that's the problem. If it killed the dinosaurs, why are we still here? Why didn't it kill everything else then?
Why are the elephants still here then?
That's right.
Yeah.
Why was the asteroid and why was methane gas selective is basically what I'm saying.
Well, there you
so
go.
enough of that, right?
Yeah.
Moving right along.
Moving right along, yeah. Well, you know, as a result of the series, the question or the comment that I got the most was, after the eruption of Mount St. Helens, and that was when, 1980?
May 1980.
That the aging process of what happened as a result of that eruption kind of just puts all the scientists' calendars and their dating processes on tilt. A lot of people didn't recognize that when Mount St. Helens erupted and all that ash came out, all the lava came out, that those rocks now are, and we know that happened since 1980, have the dating characteristics of things that are millions of years old.
Funny you should mention dating. That's where I'm going to start this morning, because in thinking about what we were going to do this morning, I thought, you know, because we had so many comments on the last program, I want to go back through, maybe for this session, maybe the next session, and just redefine some of the terms that I just kind of threw out, such as continental drift, dating. There was one landmass originally, which some people call Rodinia. By the way, if there was one landmass, which the Bible says there was, and we'll get to that here in just a minute, that answers the question of how all the animals got to the ark. Because people will say, well, okay, well, if there was an ark that was probably in the Mid-East, Iran, let's just say, was the center of the world at that time, approximately, Saudi Arabia thereabouts, then how did animals from Australia get to the ark? Good question, based on what you see today. But that wasn't what there was pre-flood. Pre-flood, there was one landmass.
One landmass.
Yeah. Back to dating just for a second. There's two major problems with dating, which I'm going to get into in just a second. Number one, science does not recognize a global flood. Does not. So if the flood was a cataclysmic event, and it was, to an event that I would like to try to explain the next time we're together, that how destructive it was. People think, well, it just rained for 40 days and 40 nights, and that. No. That was just a blip on the radar to what happened. And then secondly, did God, and I want you to think about this for a second, did God create with apparent age? And the answer is absolutely yes. Because when he created the plants and the trees, he created them with the seed in them ready for reproduction. So if you take a fruit tree, if you're going to have seeds, you have to have the fruit on the tree with the seeds in it ready for reproduction. When he created Adam and Eve, he said, be fruitful and multiply. They were childbearing age. They were created with apparent age. So if during the 6 days of creation, he rested on the seventh, but during the 6 days of creation, if he created things that were ready for reproduction, be fruitful and multiply and fill the face of the earth, they were created with an apparent age. And a classic example of that, if people dispute that, the first miracle that Christ ever did was turning the water into wine. And the host said, why did you save the best that they normally serve last until the first? Because wine basically takes time to age, and the more time, the more age, then in a lot of cases, the better it is, correct? But Christ took water and made it with apparent age right out of the gate. So did Christ create with apparent age? Yes, he did. Wow. Would that, in combination with the global flood, have a direct bearing on dating today?
Would have to.
It does. And that's why if you take the various dating methods and go to Mount St. Helens, it's what they call a discontinuity, that they do not line up. You'll get millions and billions of years when they date rocks out of Mount St. Helens when we know it was started in May 1980. That's why Mount St. Helens was not very friendly. That's one of the reasons. It was not very friendly to science.
So, what is science doing with this evidence?
Easy.
Ignoring it.
Ignore it.
Okay.
Let me give you a classic example, as long as we're talking about dating here for a second. Dinosaurs supposedly died off 65 million years ago. The problem with that is that Dr. Mary Schweitzer, and this was about 10 years ago when it started, and she is the doctor candidate at that time. She's now a PhD. At that time, she was working for University of Montana. Now I think it's University of Iowa. She is the one that discovered the T-Rex skeleton in Montana that was over 90% complete. Had those two little feet on the front. You know, they always suspected were there, but they never knew. But then she finally found the fossil of one that was 90% complete, and it's named Sue. It's in the Museum of Natural History in Chicago. When they lifted the thigh bone out to take it back to the lab to get all the incrustation off of it, it split in half. In the thigh bone was fresh red blood cells and muscle tissue.
Wow.
Yeah. That was on the national news for one day, and you've never seen it since. The only problem is she's found two more exactly like that. So it is now common practice. Well, I don't want to say common practice because when they find dinosaur bones of worth, they don't start cracking them open to see what's inside. But they've had other ones break because they're so large that when they lift them out by helicopter, unless they're perfectly balanced and encased in plaster of Paris, which is what they do, they will break. And they have found multiple examples since then of, you can go on the internet, just type in dinosaur muscle tissue, red blood cells, something like that, and it'll come up. Color pictures of it. It's awesome. So the problem.
What does that mean, John? What does that mean? I mean, I realize it means that they're not as old. It can't be 65 million years old.
It means two things.
Yeah.
In fact, the PhD doctor that she was working for at Montana, when she looked at it, and she looked in her microscope, and she said, "I can't believe what I'm looking at." And she said, "Come over here, doctor, I want you to take a look at it." He came over and he looked at it. He said, "What is that?" She said, "Well, it appears to me like it's red blood cells, hemoglobin." And since then, they have found fresh muscle tissue that you can stretch and pops back into shape. Still has water in it. His comment was, get rid of it.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Destroy the evidence.
That was his comment. Get rid of it, or let's don't make it realistic. Now, what does that mean? Number one, it means the dinosaurs didn't die off 65 million years ago, that they died off a lot more recently than that. In fact, you'd have a hard case making the fact that they're probably much over a couple thousand years old, which is surprising, isn't it?
Yeah.
And secondly, does that reflect negatively on the dating methods of popular science and their views on our past, historical past? Yes, it does. Yes, it does.
I'm surprised that a professor would want to destroy evidence of that kind. So that means there has to be a political agenda.
Well, certainly there's a political agenda. Would you say there's a political agenda behind global warming?
Well, yeah.
Yeah.
But a scientist being true to science, wouldn't they want to know? Why would they just destroy something that may lead them in a refreshed path of discovery?
Ooh, that's an easy question to answer. Because if you are a sitting professor in a college today and you are a known creationist, what will happen?
Well, you lose your job and your tenure and everything else.
There you go.
Okay.
Answer the question.
So
do you think that this secular scientist, geologist at Montana University at that time is going to come out and say, we just found fresh muscle tissue and red blood cells in a thigh bone of a dinosaur that virtually conclusively proves that dinosaurs did not die off 65 million years ago? Well, he's not going to say that because he's going to be looking for work.
All right. Again.
How's that for an opening?
Oh, that's great. Let's deal with carbon dating.
Yeah, let's do it. And this is one of the questions that came up the last time we were together, Perry. And the stuff that I want to go through, carbon dating, fossils, the supercontinent, and continental drift, this is all going to come together when we come back to the Grand Canyon and when we come back to Mount St. Helens, because when we start talking about that, if you understand dating and some of these things we're going to talk about, then you'll see why the Grand Canyon was formed the way it was formed. Okay? Let's talk about dating first. There's 3 different types of dating. And I want to go slow. If you have any questions, ask me, because if people understand this, you'll see what the problems behind secular science is in this. There's 3 kinds. Carbon-14, and that's the most popular, radiometric, and index fossils.
Okay.
Carbon-14 works on this principle. It can only be used on past living things. Plants, animals, us, humans. Out of all the gases in our atmosphere, there are 2 of them, carbon-12 and nitrogen-14, and those are stable elements. When the rays from the sun come through our atmosphere, it'll strike carbon-12 and change it into carbon-14, which is now an unstable element. And carbon-14 will revert back to carbon-12. So it's called the half-life. If I take 1 pound of carbon-14 and let it go for 5,700 years approximately, that's the half-life, I'll have a half a pound. And then 5,700 years later, I'll have a quarter of a pound, and then so on.
Right.
If you do the math, you will see that all of the carbon-14 should be gone in less than 60,000 years. Okay, you with me so far? Do you find it interesting that they have found readily detectable amounts of carbon-14 in coal deposits all over the world? And coal deposits are nothing more than solidified plants.
Wow, there you go.
And coal deposits are supposed to be millions and billions of years old.
Right.
Whoops, little problem there. And what we're talking about on the Dove here this morning is stuff that science does not talk about. Okay? But we're talking about it from the geological aspect. Okay, so what happens is that when you and I are living, we breathe carbon-12, carbon-14, nitrogen-14. We breathe all this stuff, and so it stores up in our body. When we die, we still have whatever nitrogen carbon-12 was in our body, but the carbon-14 starts to revert back to carbon-12. You with me on that one? All right. So what I do is, if I'm going to see how old you were, is I measure the amount of carbon-12 in your body, and then I measure, it's a ratio, and then I measure the amount of carbon-14 that is left, because it's reverting back to carbon-12. So I measure the ratio between the 2.
All right. So I'm 2,000 years old?
I was going to say more like, you look to me like you're about 35, 38, something like that.
Love this man. Love this man. All right, we'll be right back with John Mittendorf. If you want to join us, the phone number is 7765368. We'll be right back.
Okay.
So here we go again. Oh yeah. Hanging out with all the friends.
Let's do this.
Living for the weekend. Wishing that I never dance.
Coming May 18th to the NAZ, A Taste of Summer Music Fest 2012. An event that will take you on a journey from a relaxing beach to the most extreme sounds of summer. Here, take a listen.
Sundown. Everything's gonna be alright, yeah. As we're dancing in the sunlight. Yesterday, today, forever. All may change, but you will never.
See, there's something for everyone. And if that's not enough excitement, we will be giving away a free iPad and apparel package to one lucky ticket holder. Tickets available at all Evangel store locations at the NAZ and online at 4dtix.com. Proceeds from this event will benefit Impact Athletics of Southern Oregon. Diadem and Pure Vintage Apparel will be on hand to outfit you in the latest gear. Once again, May 18th at the NAZ. One night, 4 bands, music for all ages. Doors open at 6, entertainment starts at 6:30. Bring your friends and we'll see you there.
So shine on down.
Hello and welcome to the Marriage Course.
Love always means making a sacrifice for the sake of another.
Michelle, age 10, replied, "It is never okay to kiss a boy. They always slobber all over you."
We'll be looking at how any of us can build a healthy marriage, whether you've been together a short time or for many years.
The Marriage Course, Wednesdays at 9 and Fridays at 8 on the Dove TV.
All right, carbon-14 dating, radiometric dating, index fossil dating, and then old radio host dating.
No, you're 38.
Well, anyway, John.
And Peggy's 20, right?
Oh, well, I'm going to go with that.
Yeah.
I went from 2,000 to 35 in one sentence. Hey, John Mittendorf's with us, and we're talking about
dating here.
Dating and what happened with the Grand Canyon and the evidence as a result of Mount St. Helens. And by the way, if you'd like to join us, you're welcome to do that. The phone number is 776-5368. All right, so we got the carbon monoxide, 12 and
carbon 14, carbon 14. And basically all it is they just measure a ratio between carbon 12, which is a stable element, and carbon 14, which is an unstable element, which is going back to carbon 12. And they just measure to see how much of each is in whatever they're looking at, a plant or a human or an animal, and then they come up with this figure. You with me on that one?
Yeah.
Can you see any problems with that?
Yeah.
Okay. If it's good up to about 60,000 years, if you're going to tell me that you carbon dated something 80 to 100,000 years, it can't be because there's no carbon-14 left.
Yeah, so what did you use?
What did you use? Well, you didn't use carbon-14.
You use radiometric?
Well, no, we're going to get to that in just a minute.
Yeah.
Carbon-14 is only used on past living things.
Okay.
See, when it comes to dating rocks, then we're going to go to radiometric in just a second. Okay, so on carbon-14, there's some problems with that. Number one, if I'm going to date something that's 50,000 years old, do I know how much carbon-12 was in there 50,000 years ago?
No.
It's an assumption. Over 50,000 years, has the decay rate been linear for the carbon-14? I don't know.
So wait a minute. Are you saying they just pick a figure?
Yeah, it's an assumption.
So they start at 50,000 and try to work back from that?
No. I'm just saying if I date something, I get a date of 50,000 years.
Oh, okay.
What I'm telling you is I had to know how much was in there originally of the stable element.
All right,
See,
to assume
it's
that
an
date.
assumption.
Got it. All right.
Okay, secondly, as the carbon-14 reverts back to 12, has it been linear? In science's mind, yes, it has. In the biblical perspective, no, it hasn't. Why? There was a catastrophic global flood.
Oh, okay.
Thirdly, the and this is why it's important. Thirdly, the carbon-12 and carbon-14 has never been contaminated by water. Now, how would it be contaminated by water? You see what's happening?
Yeah.
Do you see why science backs away from the flood? Because science's perspective is, let's explain everything that we see around us today in the universe and the earth and all explainable things without God, without the Bible. And that's why Mount St. Helens, when we get to it, was very, very destructive to science because it generated in hours and days what science says takes millions and billions of years.
Wow.
You cannot walk into Barnes & Noble and pick up a book that will tell you what a blessing Mount St. Helens was to modern science. They don't exist because there's a problem there.
There's a problem there. All right.
Okay, let's go to radiometric. This is a little more complicated. Radiometric is used on rocks. Those are the oldest things on Earth. And there's three kinds of rocks. You have igneous, which is lava. You have metamorphic, which is granite. And you have sedimentary. This is a sedimentary rock. If people on television want to hold that up, they can see that. That's a sedimentary rock. And basically, sediments are basically what? They're mud and minerals, water, that's been compressed and turned into a rock.
Is that a bug?
That is a trilobite. We're going to get to that in just a minute.
All right.
By the way, that rock is 100 million years old, according to science, so don't drop it. That's an old rock.
Okay.
According to science.
100 million.
100, and I'm going to show you why they date that 100 million years old.
All right.
All right. Now, radiometric is basically similar to carbon-14 in that they use what they call parent and daughter elements. Rocks have radioactive elements in them. So I'm going to say that one of the most popular dating methods is uranium-lead. And uranium-238, if you let it sit, will decay into lead-206. But it will do it over 4.5 billion years. So like carbon-14, if I pick up a rock, if I want to use the uranium-lead method, and there's a lot of different methods. There's strontium, rubium, we don't need to go into that. But what I do is I measure the amount of uranium-238, and I measure the amount of lead, because uranium is reverting back to lead. Okay. And I measure the ratio between the two, and I'm going to come up with a figure. That's radiometric dating. Do you see the problems? It sounds simple. It is. But do you see the problems with that? Can I go back 4.5 billion years and tell you how much uranium-238 was in that rock originally? It's an assumption. Over 4.5 billion years, has the decay rate been constant? I have no idea. It's an assumption. Thirdly, has that rock ever been contaminated with water? From science, no. From biblical perspective, yes. And you see why?
Yeah.
The flood.
Right.
The flood.
Wow.
So you see what's happening here?
Okay.
All of your dating methods, and dating methods are advertised as genuine. In other words, this rock is 4.5 billion years old because we radiometric dated it. And you go, oh, okay, well, that must be scientifically accurate. No, it's not. Well, this, let's say the Shroud of Turin, which is basically vegetable matter, is 30,000 years old, let's say. Well, it was carbon-14 dated. No, it's not. There's major problems with all of them. In fact, let me read you a couple of quotes, Perry, before we get to index fossils. No matter how useful it is, the radiocarbon method is still not capable of yielding accurate and reliable results. There are gross discrepancies, the chronology is uneven and relative, and the accepted dates are selected dates. Who said that? Anthropological Journal of Canada, Radiocarbon Ages in Error.
So that's
a secular magazine.
And they admitted they selected the dates.
Yeah. And what they will do is if they have a rock that they want to date, they will use multiple dating methods, and then they will pick the one that gives them the approximate date or age that they're looking for. Scientific method. I'll give you another quote. Dating methods may be further summarized by the simple statement that there are really no reliable long-time radiological clocks, and even the short-time radiocarbon clock is in serious need of repair. Dr. Melvin Cook, Physical Chemistry, Yale.
Wow.
So when we get to the Grand Canyon here and we start talking about ages and rocks and the dates and stuff, there's two perspectives. When an evolutionist looks at the rock, it's the same rock that a creationist looks at. But the point is, do you understand when they tell you it's 20 million years old or whatever the date is it important for you to understand how they came up with that number and what the problems with their methods are, what their methodology is? Yes.
I'm hearing you say that it's arbitrary across the board.
Very. That's why if I take a dating method and I go, this is why Mount St. Helens was so destructive to science. That's why when I take a dating method and I go to Mount St. Helens, or if I go to the Kilauea volcano flow in Hawaii, we know when they happened. We get dates in millions and billions of years when actually Mount St. Helens was May 1980. Whoops.
Yeah.
But that's not really advertised. Last dating method, index fossils. If you want to hold this up to the people that are watching TV, you can do this. This is what's called the Standard Geologic Column. It was developed by Charles Lyell in the 1800s, who was an evolutionist.
I don't think they can see that.
Okay.
Well, maybe no, they can't. Okay.
It's in every geology, biology textbook in the country, high school, college. And basically what it says, and it sounds good at the outset, that if I was to dig down in the earth, let's say 3 or 4 or 5 miles, that the oldest things down there, the oldest rocks, the rocks that I find should be the oldest. The rocks, the top up here, should be the youngest. If I find fossils down at the bottom, they should be the oldest. Fossils up at the top, they should be the youngest. Sound logical?
Yeah.
It is. So, if I'm digging in Africa, is where a lot of fossils are coming out of now.
Africa.
In Africa, correct. Because that was kind of the center of civilization, North Africa. That if I find a fossil, how do I date the fossil? Because I'm looking for something most likely that's in the millions of years old, right? Carbon-14 is only good to what, 60? It's not a rock, so I can't use radiometric dating, right? Then how do I date it? I date it by the fauna or the material around it. This is called circular reasoning. As an example, if you look at that geologic column, go down to the very bottom and go over to the far right, you'll see a trilobite over there. Trilobite's a little animal. There used to be a bazillion of them before the flood.
Yeah.
You see the trilobite right there?
Right there.
Okay, now come over to the far left where you have all the dates and the different ages. How old is that trilobite according to the standard geologic column?
100 million years.
That's why that rock is 100 million years old. So if I'm digging in the ground and I dig up, and if I dig up that rock and there's a trilobite in it, and I'm thinking, gee, I wonder how old this rock and that trilobite is. I go to my standard geologic column, come over to the far left. It'll say that it was in the Precambrian time period, which is 100 million years old. That rock and that trilobite is now 100 million years old. That's how index fossil dating is done.
All right, and so how did they come up with this scale on the left of the years?
That was Charles Lyell that formulated that because he thought that's the way that it should be.
Oh,
and he just happened to be an evolutionist.
Okay.
Any questions?
No. No, I mean, it's, it's science. Why am I doubting this?
I laugh a little bit, but that's...
It's sad, really, because...
It is sad because when they say it's been carbon-14 dated, it's been radiometric dated, it's been dated by index fossils. National Geographic a couple years ago ran the headline article in Nat Geo was, how old is it? And they went through this stuff, and it's proposed as it's scientific fact.
All right, let me take a call. Hi, Patty, you're on with John Mittendorf. You have a question about DNA and evolution?
Yeah, when I was in college, and I'm 59 years old, and I took a biology class, and to pass it, I had to literally park my brain, and because when you run into putting DNA up against evolution, it's like you have to be schizophrenic or just not think at all to even have them both in the same book. And I just, my grandfather was a scientist and a mathematician. And I never, from the time I was in early school all the way through college, I could not do the science, and I couldn't do the math, although I got a perfect score in logic on a computer programming test. But the thing is I think that they're taking a lot of the really good minds, and they're parking them because they don't accept lies and fabrication and false data. And I call it faux science because global warming is obviously that. And when I was in Nevada, I saw fossils up in the mountains in the desert that were sea fossils. We found them. There was hard blast bricks, all kinds of things in the Nevada desert to prove the flood and the water lines on the mountain. I mean, so how does a true scientist get through the universities to be a scientist?
Good question. Thank you, Patty.
That's a great question, and the best way that I would answer that, Patty, from my limited experience in the scientific field, I'm not a sitting professor in a college or anything, is that in Answers in Genesis, we have a number of respected PhD scientists in the various fields, biology, geology, and so on, and quite a few of them were ex-scientists. And they will all say the same thing, that as I was brought up in the culture. That's the way that I was brought up. That's what I was taught to believe. When I went to college, the professor is up on the stage. That's what he's teaching. Everything that I was immersed in, everything that I was taught came from the scientific perspective. But there were things that I doubted. And a good percentage of our PhD speakers will readily tell you that one day that I started, like Patty said, I started to unpack my brain and I started to think, and 1 + 1 did not equal 2. And then it made a very quick conversion.
Valerie, hi, you're on the air with John Mittendorf. What's your question today?
Hi, Mr. Mittendorf. Thank you for your time.
Well, thank you.
Did you do a creation and evolution seminar at Trail Christian Fellowship about 1.5 years ago?
Yes, I did, but it was, I'm going to say, about 6-7 months ago.
Oh, okay. And are you going to do another one in the area at any time soon? Because at that time you said you would.
Yes, we're thinking about it, and it looks like we're also going to be doing one at a church in Sam's Valley or Grants Pass in September. Either late September, early October. When we do, we'll talk about it on the Dove.
Oh, that would be so awesome.
Right.
No one wanted to leave that day. That was wonderful. So I'll keep looking for that on events at the Dove website?
Yep,
yes,
that's
you will.
the place to go. Thank you, Valerie.
Okay, thank you so much.
Just real quick, Perry, when Is it time for a break?
Yeah.
Okay, just real quick, when Patty called up and she said the DNA,
Yeah.
DNA is another reason where science has a major problem. We know for a fact that you cannot have species go to species. In other words, an elephant go to an ape go to a man. Why?
DNA.
Because of DNA.
All right, we'll be right back with John Mittendorf in just a few moments.
Hi, I'm Tim the Timinator from Four Seasons Nursery. Thank you for watching and supporting the Dove and Christian Broadcasting. Like the folks at the Dove, we at Four Seasons value honesty, integrity, and quality. So if you're looking for great garden products such as vegetables, flowers, shrubs, or trees, come by and check us out. I'm sure you'll find the success you're looking for.
Four Seasons Nursery, half a mile north of Vilas Road on Crater Lake Avenue.
I'm a watercolor artist, and I have to take my paintings to galleries everywhere, including the Rogue Gallery and Art Center. So of course, I love my Subaru. I just lay down the back seat and these babies slide right in. I used to drive a Toyota, but my Subaru has more room, is quiet, and gets better highway mileage. I'm Barbara, and that's what makes a Subaru my Subaru.
Southern Oregon Subaru on Biddle Road, Medford.
I love my Subaru.
For the greenest of lawns and amazing gardens.
The Grange knows.
For happy pets, backyard birds, and that perfect gift.
The Grange knows.
For the ranch and the farm. Or a great pair of jeans.
The Grange knows.
For helpful advice, come to the experts that know, or find Floyd online anytime. Grange Co-op.
Let's grow!
There's one place you can go every morning for the latest information and weather. It's 11:30 now past the hour. We got some rain out there and heavy snow through the mountain passes.
Throughout the morning, we get your viewpoint on the world.
We've got the latest local and national news every quarter hour.
Well, in our news headlines today, there's optimism that home prices may stabilize.
And all the latest from the world of sports.
Get your day off to a great start.
Mornings on the Dove.
Every weekday from 6 a.m.
It's the best way to start your day. Well, fascinating discussion with our buddy John Mittendorf. He also works with Answers in Genesis, and he does do these seminars, and we will keep you posted when they come available, perhaps in the fall as well. And we're dealing with the subject of, dating. How do you date fossils and rocks and plants and living things? And in particular, how does that relate to what the Grand Canyon represents? And the great spoiler of our lifetime, Mount St. Helens.
Mount St. Helens.
The great scientific spoiler, right?
Yeah, is exactly right. Okay, we just talked about dating period. Let's talk about fossilization just for a second. As I said, these major groups that we're talking about this morning, they're all going to come back when we start talking about the Grand Canyon. So when we talk about dating or fossils and all that, then you'll see it how it dovetails together. This is what science says on fossilization. That let's say something in the ocean dies, a fish. It sinks to the bottom. It's slowly covered up by sediment, and then it's buried, and then it fossilizes, and then one day, let's say the ocean recedes in that part, and then the ground recedes, and all of a sudden here's a fossil on the ground. That's science.
Okay.
That is not how fossils are formed.
Okay.
The only way, generally speaking, the only way a fossil can be formed is if an animal or a plant, something living, is quickly buried and the air is kept from it, because if the air... If this entity that dies, if air gets to it, what's going to happen?
Well, it deteriorates.
It deteriorates.
Right.
Why don't we find zillions and zillions of bones of bison out on the central plains of this country? Thousands, millions of them were shot, but they're not there.
Right.
It's because they dilute, and they go away. Besides that, if a fish dies in the ocean, it's going to be eaten before it ever hits the bottom anyway, correct? So, can you think then, but what are the evidences of fossilization that science finds very hard to explain? Is the multitude of immense fossil graveyards on every continent of this planet. I'll give you just a few.
And the elevation of them.
And the elevation, yeah.
Okay.
Scotland, New York, California, Wyoming, billions of fish. New Mexico, Alberta, Tanzania, dinosaurs. Siberia, Alaska, mammoths, the vast coal beds around the world, that's plant matter. all of that had to be quickly buried, and the air has to be kept from it so it doesn't, as you said, degenerate. What would cause a mass burial around the globe of plants, insects, animals?
An overnight rainstorm.
40 days and 40 nights?
Yeah.
Exactly right.
By the way, as a side question, I keep forgetting to ask you this. Does the temperature of the water have anything to do with it?
Now, what do you mean the temperature of the water?
Well, if it was warm water,
yeah,
would there be this fossilization versus cold water, which if there is any deterioration, it would be certainly less in time?
Well, warm water means you're going to have heat, and they know that fossilization under the right conditions can happen in a very, very short period of time, months as an example.
But if the water came from the center of the earth, from the bowels of the earth, would that have been warm water?
No, it would have been extremely hot water.
Okay.
In fact, they feel that, and we're going to get into this our next segment, because I'm going to talk about what caused the flood and what happened at the flood. And it wasn't the 40 days and the 40 days and nights of rain was just a blip on the radar. That's nothing. The earth actually started to come apart. In the Hebrew, it means that it cleaved open.
Yeah.
Is what the Hebrew
and
says.
The water came from inside out.
The water dove down towards the center of the earth, and as you know, as you drill down to the earth, or if you look at mines, the deeper mines are, the hotter and hotter they get. And some of the deepest mines on the earth, the miners can only mine for 10 or 15 minutes, and they have to go to a cool room and cool off. So the further you go, the hotter it gets, and they feel at the middle of the earth is molten nickel. That's one reason why the earth is magnetic. You have a north and a south pole.
Mm-hmm.
So as the water dove down, we'll get to this next time in detail, as the water dove down towards the middle of the earth, it shot back up into the stratosphere as jets of high-powered steam and water. It's interesting that the Bible says in the flood, when the flood started, the fountains of the great deep, the deep means the ocean in Hebrew, the great deep means the very bottom of the deepest ocean.
Mm-hmm.
And it says the fountains of the deep were broken up first, and then what happened second? Rain.
And rain. So
yeah.
Heat and then cooling.
Yeah, and it's also interesting that it rained for 40 days and 40 nights. The fountains of the deep were shut up after 150 days.
All right, so does that temperature have anything to do with fossilization?
It could speed it up.
Okay.
Because you have heat and you have pressure,
right,
which speeds the process up.
Right.
Exactly.
Right.
Okay, so fossilization, there's only really one thing today that explains that, and that is?
Lack
flood.
of oxygen, yeah.
The flood. The flood, yeah. Okay. Here's a quote. Comparatively few remains of organisms now inhabiting the earth are being deposited under conditions favorable for their preservation as fossils. It is nevertheless remarkable that so vast a number of fossils are embedded in the rocks. William J. Miller, Emeritus Professor of Geology, UCLA, said that. What he's saying is I can't understand why there's so many fossils buried in the rocks today. If I go to the Bible, it's very easy. If I go to secular science, he's right. It's very difficult.
Okay.
It all keeps going back to the Bible, to Genesis, and to the flood,
right,
which science does not recognize. Okay, how much time do we have left?
You have, about 5 minutes.
Okay, I can do this. One supercontinent, we talked about this our last time, and there was some questions came up on this one. One supercontinent, some people call it Pangea, people call it Rodinia, whatever. And science will agree with this. One of the few things they agree with. And I'm reading from Genesis, first chapter. Then God said, "Let the waters under the heavens be gathered together into one place, and let the dry land, singular, appear." Seas are plural, land is singular. Okay? So prior to the flood, you had one landmass, and then you had multiple seas, which we still have multiple seas. You really have one sea. The earth is 70% water, but you basically have seas, plural.
Divided by landmass.
Divided by the landmass, right. And, of course, before the flood, you had one landmass, according to this, because land is singular, and in this, seas are plural. All right? And it's interesting, Perry, that, as I mentioned, we started today, that if there was one landmass, and I believe there was, that answers the question, how did all the animals get to the ark?
Right.
Easy, because you had one landmass.
Right.
It's simple, okay? So, if we had one landmass, why do we have multiple landmasses today?
Well,
say continental drift.
Okay. I went back and looked at what you said, that the East Coast of America and the West Coast of Europe, which is kind of a puzzle of two pieces that drifted and they could be connected.
Let me give you a couple of examples, and there's a lot of them. Continents on either side of the Atlantic Ocean have complementary shapes, and as they drifted apart, the Atlantic Ocean basin was formed. You have to think about that for a second. We're talking about a serious, catastrophic event, not just rain for 40 days and 40 nights. All right? Many geological features that can be matched across the continents on either side of the Atlantic Ocean but are not found on the ocean floor. And what they mean is there's identical rock strata, fossils, directions of sediment transport. In other words, as sediments were transported across the continents from the flood, and they can track that because of the signature left by minerals. In fact, they know that the floodwaters came across the North American continent from Canada going southeast. And they know that from what they call varves, V-A-R-V-E-S, which are ripples in rocks. You can tell exactly which way the water's going. It's really pretty simple.
Grand Canyon again.
And Grand Canyon is another one. You can tell exactly which way the water was going. As we talked about the last time we were together, that if the Grand Canyon is approximately 230 miles long, and that happened over millions of years, where did all of that sediment go to that the Colorado River supposedly carved out of the canyon?
Yeah.
It's not there. It's not there. So, Antarctica and Australia, when you talk about parts of the map that are matching, Antarctica and India, when you look at a map, those land masses, if you slide them back together again, line up very, very nicely. There's a coal field that goes through Pennsylvania that takes right up in France and keeps going right through France. It's exact same coal. So there's a lot of elements from geological, I'm going to say, from geology that line up from continent to continent, that if the continents would have been together, that's what it would look like.
Now, will the science recognize this?
Yes.
Okay.
The difference being, and remember when we interviewed Dr. Andrew Snelling? And he's a renowned geologist, Christian. And he said the only difference is speed and time. Science will tell you that there was one landmass, that it did separate. And by the way, continental drift came from a secular scientist. That is not a creationist revelation, so to speak. But they will tell you that it happened over millions of years and was very slow. Creationists will say, no, it happened over a very short period of time and it happened relatively fast. The proof of that is your major mountain ranges. Most all of your major mountain ranges are on the coast. And as the continents bumped into each other, and it's called upthrusting, it would have taken, let's say one continent bumps into another, it would take that coast and then shove it up into a mountain range. And that is how you explain why all the high mountains, whether it's the Andes, the Himalayas, Mount Everest, all have marine fossils at the top of the mountains. Science cannot explain that. How else do you explain marine fossils at the top of all the high mountains on Earth? Is teaching biblical science cool or what?
Yeah, that's wonderful. Just wonderful. You just wonder why there's such this deception in secular science.
Easy. Because then I have to accept the Bible, and if I accept the Bible, then I have to accept the God. I have to accept that there's a Creator, and that there's a God that is holding me accountable.
John, you're fascinating. These notes are available. You can let us know.
They're not available now. I was just talking with Sue before we started, because we're going to go on for some more segments on this. And by the way, we decided to do them every couple of weeks instead of doing so there's not a huge gap in between the two.
All right.
So I think towards the end, then I'll put them all into one set.
Okay, we'll put them into one pack.
Yeah, instead of having multiple sets.
Thank you, buddy. Thank you. Appreciate it.
People can have, if they want, Sue can email them to them.
Okay. We'll let you know when they're available. All right, thank you, John. We look forward to having you back in a couple of weeks. And John Benwither, we'll be talking more about the Grand Canyon and Mount St. Helens.
Yes, we will.
Okay, and we'll see you next time on Focus Today.
You bet.